Staff Sergeant Emma Walsh had always been different from the other soldiers at Fort Bragg. At barely 5 feet 2, with steel gray eyes that seemed to calculate wind speed and bullet drop automatically, she moved through the base with quiet purpose while others made noise. Her fellow soldiers in the 4th Infantry Division called her Ghost, not because she was invisible, but because her presence was felt only when it mattered most. Every evening after mandatory training ended, while other soldiers headed to the mess hall or called home, Emma stayed behind on the rifle range. She'd collect spent brass casings, reset paper targets, and calibrate equipment for the next day's training. Nobody asked her to do it. Nobody expected it. She volunteered because she understood something most soldiers didn't. Excellence lived in the smallest details. "You don't have to stay, Walsh," Sergeant First Class Rodriguez would tell her, as he locked up the armory each night. "Range duty isn't your responsibility." "Yes, sir," she'd reply, never looking up from her meticulous work. "Just want to make sure everything's ready for tomorrow." Rodriguez respected her dedication, even if he didn't understand it. Emma could field strip and reassemble her custom M40A3 rifle, which she'd nicknamed Whisper, blindfolded in under 90 seconds. Her shooting scores were legendary. Not 98%, not 99%, but 100% every single time. She'd modified the weapon personally, installing a custom trigger, enhanced scope, and even hand-loaded her own ammunition for maximum accuracy. The other soldiers respected her skills, but found her intensity unsettling. During downtime, they'd joke and play cards while Emma studied topographical maps or practiced breathing techniques. She didn't join their conversations about home, relationships, or post-military plans. When pressed, she'd simply say, "I'm here to do a job." But there was something else about Emma that the others couldn't quite identify, a tension in her shoulders, a way her eyes scanned every room before she entered, as if she was constantly preparing for something terrible to happen. Her bunk was always perfect, her gear always pristine, but her personal belongings were sparse. No photos from home, no letters, no mementos. Just a small wooden cross and a faded newspaper clipping she kept in her footlocker, though nobody had ever seen what it contained. Captain Harrison, their commanding officer, often used Emma as an example during briefings. "Walsh represents what this unit should aspire to," he'd announce. "Discipline, precision, dedication." But even he noticed the wall she kept between herself and everyone else. During mandatory psych evaluations, Emma passed with flying colors. Too perfectly, some would later realize. As 2014 progressed, tensions in Afghanistan were escalating. Intelligence reports suggested increased enemy activity in the southern hills, particularly around suspected weapons caches. The 4th Infantry was being tasked with more dangerous reconnaissance missions, and Emma's unique skills were increasingly in demand. "We're shipping out next week," Rodriguez informed the squad during their evening briefing. "Deep reconnaissance in Kandahar province. Surveillance and target designation for an upcoming airstrike." Emma nodded silently, but those who knew her well noticed the almost imperceptible straightening of her spine. She spent that entire night on the range, firing shot after shot into targets at increasingly impossible distances. Each bullet found its mark with mechanical precision, but there was something different about her technique, more intense, more focused, as if she was preparing for something beyond training. The mission briefing revealed they'd be operating in some of the most dangerous terrain in Afghanistan. 8-person squad, minimal support, radio check-ins every 4 hours. Emma would take point as the designated marksman, with Whisper ready for immediate deployment. The coordinates they'd been given were remote, mountainous, and according to local intelligence, potentially crawling with enemy fighters. "Questions?" Captain Harrison asked after detailing the mission parameters. Emma raised her hand, unusual for her. "Sir, what's our extraction protocol if communications are compromised?" Harrison frowned. "Standard procedure, Walsh. Why?" "Just want to be prepared for all contingencies, sir." That night, Emma wrote a letter she never intended to send, sealed it in an envelope, and placed it in her footlocker beneath the mysterious newspaper clipping. She cleaned Whisper one final time, loaded her custom ammunition, and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. Something about this mission felt different, final, somehow. She couldn't have known that in 72 hours. 7 of her fellow soldiers would be dead, and she would officially cease to exist. The rocky terrain of Afghanistan's southern hills stretched endlessly before Emma's squad as they moved through the narrow mountain passes. 3 days into their reconnaissance mission, the oppressive heat and constant vigilance had worn everyone down except Emma, who seemed to glide over the treacherous ground with supernatural ease. "Ghosts in her element," whispered Private Jackson, the squad's communications specialist, as he watched Emma navigate a particularly difficult rock face ahead of them. "It's like she was born for this." Staff Sergeant Miller, their squad leader, kept his eyes on Emma's position. She'd been unusually quiet, even for her, since they'd crossed into hostile territory. Her hand signals were crisp and precise, her movement patterns textbook perfect, but there was something in her posture that suggested she was anticipating danger that hadn't yet materialized. The intelligence briefing had indicated enemy movement near a suspected weapons cache, but so far they'd encountered nothing but empty mountains and the occasional distant sound of goats. Miller was beginning to wonder if their information was outdated when Emma suddenly raised her fist, the signal to freeze. Through her enhanced scope, Emma was scanning the path ahead when something caught her attention. The ground looked wrong, too level, too uniform for natural mountain terrain. She'd seen enough improvised explosive devices to recognize the subtle signs. Displaced stones, vegetation that didn't quite match the surrounding area, scratch marks were heavy. Objects had been dragged. She turned to signal Miller, but before she could communicate the danger, Private Jackson stepped directly onto what appeared to be solid ground. The explosion was massive. The pressure plate IED had been expertly concealed beneath loose stones, designed to detonate under the weight of a fully equipped soldier. The blast threw Emma backward against the rock wall, her ears ringing, vision blurred, debris raining down around her. When the smoke cleared, she found herself buried under a pile of rocks, her left arm trapped, Whisper thrown several feet away. Through the settling dust, she could see the devastating result of the explosion. 7 soldiers, her entire squad, were scattered across the rocky landscape. Miller, Jackson, Rodriguez, Williams, Thompson, Martinez, and Davis, all dead. Their bodies had been thrown in different directions by the blast, some partially buried under debris from the landslide the explosion had triggered. Emma lay trapped, listening to the terrible silence that followed the explosion. No groaning, no calls for help, no radio chatter. Just the sound of settling rocks and her own labored breathing. She tried to move her left arm and nearly passed out from the pain. Definitely broken, possibly shattered. Her radio was destroyed, the pieces scattered around her. As consciousness faded in and out, Emma became aware of voices, distant but approaching. Foreign voices, speaking in Pashto. Enemy fighters, drawn by the explosion, coming to investigate and collect weapons and intelligence from the dead Americans. With tremendous effort, Emma managed to free herself from the debris, biting back screams of pain as she pulled her mangled arm from beneath a large rock. Whisper was intact but partially buried. Her backup sidearm was missing, blown away by the blast. She had maybe minutes before the enemy fighters reached her position. The logical choice was to try to escape, to find higher ground and signal for extraction. But Emma's training and instincts told her something different. These mountains were crawling with enemy forces. A wounded American soldier trying to navigate hostile territory with a broken arm and no radio would be captured or killed within hours. Instead, Emma made a choice that would define the next decade of her life. She gathered her remaining gear, Whisper, her ammunition, and her survival pack, and began climbing toward a concealed position she'd spotted earlier during their approach. It was nearly impossible terrain, requiring her to use her good arm to pull herself up a near-vertical rock face while dragging her rifle, but Emma had always been stronger than she looked. The enemy fighters arrived 20 minutes later. Through her scope, Emma watched them examine the blast site, collect dog tags and weapons, and take photographs for intelligence purposes. They spent hours searching the area, but found no trace of an eighth soldier. The landslide had covered her tracks, and her training in concealment had left no obvious signs of escape. From her elevated position, Emma realized she had a choice to make. She could try to signal the search and rescue helicopters she could. Here in the distance, identify herself and return home to safety. Or she could stay here in the mountains and continue the mission her squad had died trying to complete. She thought about the intelligence briefing, the weapons cache they'd been sent to locate, the enemy supply routes that ran through these mountains. She thought about Jackson, who'd been planning to propose to his girlfriend when they got home. She thought about Miller, who had 3 kids and a wife in North Carolina. Emma made her decision. She would stay. She would complete the mission. And she would make sure her squad's sacrifice meant something. The search and rescue teams found 7 bodies, 7 dog tags, 7 weapons. They found pieces of Emma's equipment, a damaged scope, torn fabric from her uniform, even her backup sidearm, but no body, no blood trail, no definitive proof of death. After 72 hours, the search was called off. The official report read, Staff Sergeant Emma Walsh, Mia, presumed killed by enemy action. Her parents received a folded American flag and a Bronze Star posthumously awarded for her service. The military held a memorial service with an empty casket. Her name was etched into the memorial wall at Fort Bragg. But Emma Walsh wasn't dead. She was just getting started. The first winter nearly killed her. Emma had survived the initial weeks after the explosion by scavenging equipment from enemy positions, using her sniper skills to eliminate isolated sentries and collect their supplies. She'd found a network of caves in the upper elevations, carved by centuries of wind and water that provided perfect concealment and protection from both the elements and enemy patrols. But she hadn't anticipated how brutal the Afghan winter could be at altitude. With only military rations, a damaged sleeping bag, and no reliable heat source, Emma spent months on the edge of starvation and hypothermia. She learned to hunt mountain goats with precision shots that attracted no attention. She learned to collect rainwater and melt snow efficiently. Most importantly, she learned to be completely, utterly invisible. During those first few months, Emma had ample opportunity to signal for extraction. American helicopters flew reconnaissance patterns over her area regularly. She could have easily created a signal fire or used reflective materials to attract their attention. Instead, she watched them pass and remained hidden. The reason was simple. She discovered something. From her elevated position, Emma had observed enemy supply routes that weren't in any intelligence briefing. Weapons convoys moving through hidden mountain passes, ammunition caches being established in remote locations, communication networks that stretched across hundreds of miles of supposedly empty terrain. The explosion that killed her squad hadn't been random. It had been carefully planned to eliminate American reconnaissance in this specific area. Emma realized that her official death was actually an advantage. Enemy forces weren't looking for her. American forces weren't looking for her. She was completely invisible, free to observe and operate without any constraints or oversight. She could gather intelligence, disrupt enemy operations, and protect American forces in ways that would be impossible for an official military unit. So she stayed. Over the following months, Emma established an elaborate early warning system throughout the mountain range. Using salvaged electronics from destroyed enemy equipment, she created motion sensors, communication intercepts, and surveillance networks that covered every major approach to the region. She mapped enemy patrol routes, documented supply schedules, and identified key personnel in the local command structure. Her first targeted elimination came 6 months after the explosion. An enemy scout had been positioning himself to observe American helicopter flight patterns, clearly planning an ambush. Emma's shot from 800 meters was clean and silent. The scout simply disappeared from his position, his body falling into a deep ravine where it would never be found. She developed a signature for her work, a small carved symbol of crosshairs surrounded by a ghost figure, which she left at the scene of each successful mission. Local enemy fighters began to whisper about a mountain spirit that protected the valley, eliminating their scouts and sabotaging their operations. Years passed. Emma's hair turned gray from stress and exposure, but her hands remained steady, her eyes sharp. She aged gracefully in her mountain stronghold, maintaining perfect physical condition through constant activity and careful nutrition. Her makeshift home expanded into a sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation, complete with solar panels, water purification systems, and communication equipment capable of monitoring enemy transmissions across the entire region. Emma kept detailed logs of every enemy movement, every weapon shipment, every communication she intercepted. Her handwritten notebooks contained intelligence that would have been invaluable to American command, but she never broke radio silence. She was fighting her own war now by her own rules. By year 5, she'd confirmed 43 enemy eliminations, neutralized 12 weapons caches, and disrupted countless supply operations. Enemy forces had learned to avoid certain areas entirely, attributing the mysterious deaths to local superstition and supernatural forces. Emma never questioned her choice to remain in the mountains. She thought often about her fallen squad members, about the mission they died trying to complete, about the American soldiers who were still fighting this war. Every enemy fighter she eliminated, every weapons cache she destroyed, every intelligence report she compiled was dedicated to their memory. She had become something unprecedented in military history, a one-person special operations unit, operating completely independently, with no support, no oversight, and no official existence. She was a ghost in a most literal sense, haunting the mountains and protecting American interests from the shadows. But Emma's greatest test was yet to come. In year 10, her early warning sensors detected something unusual: American voices. On enemy communication frequencies, calls for help, the sound of an ambush in progress. After a decade of silence, Emma Walsh was about to announce her presence to the world with a single impossible shot. Staff Sergeant Kyle Martinez pressed himself against the boulder, bullets whining overhead as his thermal imaging display painted a terrifying picture. At least 15 enemy fighters had them surrounded in the narrow canyon, and his 6-person reconnaissance team, calsign Bravo 6, was running out of ammunition fast. "Command, this is Bravo 6, Martinez screamed into his radio, but only static responded. "We need immediate extraction. We're taking heavy fire and communications are down." Private Davis, their thermal operator, frantically scanned the surrounding ridgelines with his advanced optics. "Sergeant, I count multiple RPG positions on the eastern ridge. They're setting up for a coordinated strike." Through his scope, Davis watched an enemy fighter position a rocket-propelled grenade launcher on the high ground. The weapon was aimed directly at their largest piece of cover, the boulder cluster protecting half the team. Martinez knew they had maybe 30 seconds before that RPG turned their defensive position into a kill zone. "RPG, everyone down!" Martinez bellowed, but there was nowhere to go. The canyon walls were too steep, the enemy fire too concentrated. 3 American soldiers were about to die, and there was absolutely nothing anyone could do to stop it. That's when Davis saw something impossible on his thermal display. A single red dot appeared on the western ridge, nearly 800 meters away. The position was insane. The ridge was too steep for climbing, too exposed for concealment, and the angle would require superhuman marksmanship skills. No human being could have reached that position, let alone made an accurate shot from it. "Sergeant," Davis whispered, staring at his screen in disbelief. "There's someone on the western ridge." Martinez was about to dismiss it as equipment malfunction when the world exploded into sound. Crack. One rifle shot, precise and deliberate, echoed across the canyon like thunder. The enemy fighter with the RPG launcher spun like a dancer, his weapon flying from his hands as he tumbled down the mountainside. The rocket launcher bounced harmlessly off the rocks, its deadly payload unfired. The remaining enemy fighters paused, confused and frightened. In that moment of hesitation, Bravo team broke from cover and established a defensive perimeter, returning coordinated fire that forced the ambushers to retreat. But Martinez wasn't focused on the enemy withdrawal. He was staring at his tactical map, cross-referencing the coordinates Davis had given him for the shot location. His blood ran cold as the numbers resolved. Grid coordinates 34.7521 north, 71.9542 east. Those numbers matched exactly to the meter, where Staff Sergeant Anna Walsh had been declared MIA 10 years ago. "That's impossible," Martinez whispered, looking up at the western ridge. Nobody could survive up there for 10 years, and nobody could make that shot. As the gunfire died down and the enemy fully retreated, Martinez noticed something else. Carved into a nearby rock face, barely visible and weathered by years of wind and rain, was a small symbol, crosshair surrounded by a ghost figure. The same signature that had appeared on dozens of mysterious enemy deaths throughout the region over the past decade. Local intelligence had attributed the killings to various causes: rival factions, accidents, supernatural forces. But Martinez was looking at evidence of something far more extraordinary. Someone had been living in these mountains for 10 years, conducting a solo war against enemy forces, protecting American operations from the shadows. Someone who could make an 800-meter shot at an impossible angle under combat conditions. Someone who was supposed to be dead. Martinez keyed his radio. "Command, this is Bravo 6. We need immediate extraction and a full special operations investigation team. Something's happening here that's way above our pay grade." As they waited for pickup, one question haunted every member of Bravo team. Who fired that impossible shot? 6 hours later, a specialized Delta Force investigation team arrived at the coordinates, led by Colonel Marcus Webb, a 30-year veteran who'd personally trained advanced snipers at Fort Bragg. The team approached with extreme caution. If enemy forces had developed technology capable of faking sniper positions and mimicking American military signatures, it represented a massive security breach. Using state-of-the-art climbing equipment and tactical drones, the team ascended the western ridge where the impossible shot had originated. The terrain was treacherous, loose rock, steep angles, and exposed positions that would be suicide for any normal operative. But someone had definitely been there. Recent footprints in the dust, disturbed vegetation, and most remarkably, a camouflage position that was invisible from every angle except directly overhead. The hide site was a masterpiece of fieldcraft, constructed from natural materials, stones, branches, moss, that blended seamlessly into the mountainside. Thermal signatures were masked by carefully placed reflective materials. The entrance was concealed behind what appeared to be solid rock. Colonel Webb's team breached the position expecting to find sophisticated electronic, warfare equipment, or enemy surveillance gear. Instead, they discovered something that defied all logic: a small living space, meticulously organized and maintained. Military-grade water purification system, solar charging panels connected to communication equipment, detailed topographical maps covering hundreds of square miles, marked with enemy movement patterns dating back years. And sitting calmly in the center of it all, methodically cleaning a rifle, was a small woman with short gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail instantly. She looked up as the team entered, showed no surprise, no fear. She carefully placed her rifle on a makeshift table and reached for a worn leather pouch. From inside, she produced a military identification card, faded but readable. Emma Walsh, Staff Sergeant, 4th Infantry Division. Mia 2014. Colonel Webb stared at the ID, then at the woman, then back at the ID. His voice caught in his throat. "Ghost? Jesus Christ, we thought you were dead." Emma stood slowly, her voice quiet but steady. "I never left my post, Colonel. I was just waiting for the right moment to complete the mission." Colonel Webb's hands trembled slightly as he examined Emma's identification card for the third time. Around him, his Delta Force team maintained their tactical positions, but their weapons were lowered. The woman sitting calmly before them posed no immediate threat. In fact, she seemed almost relieved to finally have visitors. "Emma Webb," said softly, using her first name for the first time in over a decade. "We held a memorial service for you, your parents. They think you're dead. Everyone thinks you're dead." Emma nodded slowly, her expression unchanged. "That was necessary for the mission, sir. I had intelligence indicating this region was being used for a major enemy operation. My official death allowed me to operate without constraints." She gestured to the notebooks scattered around her living space, dozens of them, filled with meticulous handwriting. "For 10 years, I'd been documenting enemy movements, supply routes, communication patterns, leadership structures. Every drug runner I eliminated, every weapons cache I destroyed, every supply convoy I disrupted. It was all preparation for what happened today." Webb picked up one of the notebooks, his eyes widening as he read entries dating back years. Detailed intelligence reports that would have been invaluable to command, tactical assessments that could have saved lives, enemy positions mapped with surgical precision. "You've been conducting solo reconnaissance for a decade," he said in disbelief. "How did you survive? How did you know Bravo Team was American?" Emma pointed to a small device monitoring multiple radio frequencies. "I've been tracking all military communications in this region. When I heard American voices in distress, I acted. The shot had to be taken. 3 soldiers would have died if that RPG had fired." She led them through hidden passages she'd carved into the rock face over the years, showing them an elaborate early warning system that would have impressed the Pentagon's best engineers. Motion sensors constructed from salvaged electronics, communication intercept equipment built from spare parts, a complete intelligence network operated by one person for 10 years. "The blast that killed my squad wasn't random," Emma continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. "This entire mountain range has been serving as a staging area for major operations against American forces. I've documented 43 confirmed enemy eliminations, 12 weapons caches neutralized, countless supply routes disrupted." Private Johnson, the youngest member of Webb's team, stared at the wall where Emma had carved hash marks, each one representing a successful mission. "Ma'am, why didn't you ever try to make contact? We could have supported you, extracted you, given you resources." Emma's smile was sad but determined. "Because then I would have been just another soldier following orders. This way, I could protect American forces without bureaucracy, without politics, without anyone knowing they were being protected. Webb was beginning to understand the scope of what Emma had accomplished. You've been a one-person special operations unit for 10 years, operating completely independently, with no support, no oversight, gathering intelligence that could have changed the course of multiple operations. The enemy thought I was dead, Emma said simply. That made me more effective than an entire battalion. They couldn't prepare for threats they didn't know existed. The investigation team spent hours examining Emma's intelligence cache. Her documentation was extraordinary. Not just military positions and supply routes, but detailed personality profiles of enemy commanders, financial networks funding operations in the region, communication codes that had taken her years to decipher. Emma, Webb said finally, what you've accomplished here is unprecedented, but you can't stay hidden forever. The Pentagon needs to know about this. The intelligence community needs to debrief you. Emma was quiet for a long moment, looking out through a concealed opening at the mountains she'd called home for a decade. I know, sir. I've been preparing for this day. Everything is documented, cataloged, ready for transfer to proper authority. She handed Webb a sealed envelope. These are my recommendations for future operations in this region, based on 10 years of observation. The enemy command structure, their likely responses to various tactics, their supply vulnerabilities. Everything American forces would need to know. Webb opened the envelope, scanning pages of tactical analysis that read like a masterclass in counterinsurgency operations. This is ... This is incredibly valuable intelligence. That was always the mission, sir, Emma replied. Gather intelligence on enemy positions and capabilities. I never received orders to terminate the mission, so I continued until completion. As Webb's team prepared to escort Emma back to forward operating base Chapman, she made one final request. She walked to a rifle, the same weapon reported destroyed with its owner 10 years earlier, and performed one last function check. Sir, I'd like to make one thing clear in your report, she said, looking directly at Webb. I didn't survive for 10 years because I was hiding. I thrived for 10 years because I was hunting. Every enemy fighter I eliminated, every operation I disrupted, every piece of intelligence I gathered, it was all for my squad. For Miller, Jackson, Rodriguez, Williams, Thompson, Martinez, and Davis. She touched the carved memorial wall where she'd etched their names. They died completing this mission. I lived to finish what they started. Colonel Webb realized he was looking at something extraordinary, not just a survivor, but a warrior, who had transformed personal tragedy into a decade-long campaign of protection for American forces. Emma Walsh hadn't just survived. She had become a legend. The journey back to civilization would mark the end of Emma's solitary war, but Webb suspected it was only the beginning of a much larger story. The debriefing room at forward operating. Base Chapman fell silent as Emma finished her preliminary report. Across from her sat a panel of officers representing every branch of military intelligence, their faces displaying mixtures of amazement, disbelief, and professional respect. General Patricia Thompson, the base commander, leaned forward in her chair. Sergeant Walsh, in my 30 years of military service, I've never encountered anything like this. You've essentially conducted a decade-long special operations campaign, with zero support, zero oversight, and zero official authorization. Emma sat perfectly straight, her hands folded on the metal table. Ma'am, my orders were to conduct reconnaissance and gather intelligence on enemy positions. I received no orders to terminate the mission, so I continued until completion. But you were declared dead, protested Colonel Stevens from Army Intelligence. Your status was changed to Kia. You had no authority to continue operating. With respect, sir, Emma replied calmly. Dead soldiers don't require authorization. I was operating as a ghost. officially non-existent, therefore not bound by standard protocols. The intelligence officers exchanged glances. Emma's logic was unconventional, but her results were undeniable. The notebook she provided contained 10 years of intelligence that would require months to fully analyze. Enemy supply routes, command, structures, communication protocols, financial networks, information that could reshape American strategy in the region. The shot you took to save Bravo team, General Thompson continued. Our ballistics experts say it was impossible. 800 meters, extreme elevation, wind conditions, and you fired from a position that shouldn't have been accessible to any human being. Emma shrugged slightly. I had 10 years to study that particular shooting position, ma'am. I knew. Eventually, someone would need that specific angle of fire, so I prepared for it. Dr. Angela Price, the base psychologist, had been studying Emma throughout the interview. Sergeant, how did you maintain your mental health during 10 years of complete isolation? Most people would have suffered severe psychological damage from such prolonged solitude. I wasn't alone, ma'am, Emma replied. Seeing the confusion on their faces, she clarified. I carried my squad with me. Every decision I made, every action I took, I considered what Miller would have ordered, what Jackson would have advised, what Rodriguez would have thought. They were with me the entire time. The room fell silent again. These career officers were beginning to understand that Emma Walsh wasn't just a survivor. She was something entirely new in military history. A soldier who had transformed personal. A soldier who had turned purdy. A soldier who had transformed person loss into professional excellence, who had created her own mission parameters and exceeded them beyond anyone's imagination. General Thompson made a decision. Sergeant Walsh, I'm recommending you for immediate promotion to Sergeant Major. The Medal of Honor for extraordinary heroism, Purple Heart for wounds sustained in combat, and Distinguished Service Cross for exceptional valor. I'm also authorizing full military pension with 10 years of back pay. Emma shook her head politely. Thank you, ma'am, but I respectfully decline all decorations and financial compensation. The panel was stunned. Colonel Webb leaned forward. Emma, you've earned these honors. What you've accomplished is unprecedented. Sir, the only recognition I want is permission to return to Fort Bragg and resume my duties as a sniper instructor. No ceremony, no press conferences, no official recognition beyond what's necessary for administrative purposes. Dr. Price studied Emma carefully. Why? After everything you've accomplished, why refuse recognition? Emma was quiet for a moment, then spoke with quiet intensity. Because recognition isn't why I stayed in those mountains for 10 years. I stayed because American soldiers needed protection, and I was in a position to provide it. The mission was never about me. It was about making sure other soldiers could complete their missions and go home to their families. She looked around. The room at the assembled officers. Every medal, every ceremony, every interview request takes away from the real work. I want to teach the next generation of snipers, pass on what I learned in those mountains, and continue serving in the way I'm most effective. General Thompson realized she was witnessing something remarkable, a soldier who had refused the ultimate military honor because it would interfere with her ability to continue serving. Very well, Sergeant Major Walsh. I'll arrange for your transfer back to Fort Bragg immediately. As the meeting concluded, Emma left a sealed letter on the table. This contains detailed recommendations for future operations in the region, based on my observations. I've also included tactical assessments and intelligence that should be shared with relevant commands. Colonel Webb picked up the letter. Emma, one more question. During those 10 years, did you ever regret your decision to stay? Emma paused at the door, looking back at the officers who had spent the morning trying to understand her choices. Sir, every night for 10 years, I listened to enemy communications, planning attacks on American forces. Every morning, I woke up knowing I could prevent some of those attacks. The only thing I would have regretted was leaving when I could still make a difference. She left the room with the same quiet dignity she'd carried through 10 years of solitary warfare. Behind her, the intelligence panel sat in contemplative silence, realizing they had just met a living legend who wanted nothing more than to remain invisible. Within a week, Emma Walsh was on a transport back to the United States, carrying only her rifle, her dog tags, and the absolute certainty that she'd used her skills when they mattered most. 6 months after her return to Fort Bragg, the new recruits in Advanced Sniper School had no idea they were being trained by a legend. They saw only a small, quiet woman in simple fatigues with no rank insignia, no ribbons, no indication of her extraordinary service record. Staff Sergeant Kevin Brooks watched the instructor move between shooting positions, making minor adjustments to rifles, correcting breathing techniques, teaching patience to soldiers who thought speed mattered more than precision. The other recruits called her the Ghost, partly because of her last name Walsh, but mostly because of her uncanny ability to appear beside struggling marksmen without making a sound. "Ma'am," Brooks asked during a particularly difficult long-range exercise, "what's the furthest shot you've ever made?" Emma paused, her hand still on his rifle scope. "Distance isn't what matters, son. What matters is making the shot when lives depend on it." She didn't give lectures or appear in recruitment videos. She simply demonstrated perfect marksmanship day after day, setting an example that spoke louder than any words. Her teaching method was unique. Instead of criticizing mistakes, she showed students how to correct them. Instead of pushing for faster times, she emphasized the importance of patience and precision. Private Lisa Martinez, one of the few female recruits in the program, struggled with the mental pressure of long-range shooting. During a particularly challenging exercise, she missed 5 consecutive shots at 600 meters, a failure that would typically result in remedial training or program dismissal. Emma knelt beside her position. "What are you thinking about when you pull the trigger?" "Not missing, ma'am," Martinez replied, frustration evident in her voice. "That's your problem," Emma said gently. "You're focused on failure instead of success. Try this. When you acquire your target, don't think about the shot. Think about why you're taking it. Who are you protecting? What mission are you completing? Let purpose guide your trigger pull." Martinez tried the technique. Her next shot was a perfect center hit. "How did you know that would work?" she asked. Emma smiled slightly. "Because I learned it the same way you just did, by understanding that marksmanship isn't about the weapon. It's about the person holding it." The recruits began to notice that their instructor never missed a target, never raised her voice, never showed frustration. She taught through quiet demonstration and gentle correction, always emphasizing that true strength came from discipline, not firepower. Most importantly, she taught them that the best warriors fought not for glory, but for the people they protected. Captain Michael Roberts, the school's commanding officer, observed Emma's classes with growing curiosity. Her teaching methods were unconventional, but incredibly effective. Students who trained under her showed remarkable improvement, not just in shooting accuracy, but in overall composure and tactical thinking. "Walsh," he said after one particularly impressive training session, "where did you develop your teaching methodology?" "It's unlike anything I've seen in 20 years of military instruction." Emma considered the question carefully. "Sir, I learned that you can't teach marksmanship by talking about it. You have to demonstrate it. Students learn more from watching a perfect shot than from hearing a perfect explanation." What Roberts didn't know was that Emma's teaching philosophy had been forged in the mountains of Afghanistan, where every shot had life or death consequences, where there was no second chance, no room for error. She was passing on lessons learned not in training facilities, but in actual combat against real enemies who were trying to kill American soldiers. During night training exercises, some recruits reported seeing Emma on the range after hours, practicing by moonlight. They would find her at dawn, methodically cleaning her rifle, preparing for another day of instruction. She seemed to require less sleep than normal people, as if constant vigilance had become her default state. "Ma'am," asked Corporal James Anderson during an advanced target acquisition class, "do you ever get nervous before taking a difficult shot?" Emma was quiet for a moment, looking out at the targets arranged at various distances across the range. "Nervousness means you're not prepared," she finally replied. "If you've done your job correctly, studied the conditions, controlled your breathing, understood your equipment, there's nothing to be nervous about. The shot becomes inevitable." Anderson nodded, but pressed further. "What about when people's lives depend on your shot? Doesn't that add pressure?" Emma's expression grew distant, as if she was remembering something from long ago. "That's when preparation matters most. When someone's life hangs in the balance, you don't have the luxury of doubt. You either make the shot or someone dies. It's that simple." The recruits absorbed this lesson, not knowing they were learning from someone who had made dozens of such shots, who had spent 10 years in situations where missing men American soldiers would die. As weeks turned to months, Emma's reputation spread throughout Fort Bragg. Other instructors began observing her classes, trying to understand her methods. Military psychologists requested interviews, wanting to study her teaching techniques. But Emma declined all requests for formal evaluation or documentation. "I'm here to train snipers," she told Captain Roberts when he suggested she write a training manual, "not to write about training snipers." The closest anyone came to understanding Emma's background was during a conversation with Master Sergeant David Kim, a veteran instructor who had served multiple tours in Afghanistan. He noticed something familiar about Emma's techniques, her way of reading terrain, her understanding of combat conditions. "Oh, Walsh," he said after observing one of her advanced classes, "you teach like someone who's been there. Real combat, not just training exercises." Emma met his gaze steadily. "We've all been there in different ways, Sergeant Kim. Some more than others," Kim replied. But Emma had already moved on to help another struggling recruit. Years passed. Emma aged gracefully, but her hands remained steady, her eyes sharp. New generations of snipers graduated carrying her lessons into combat zones around the world. They didn't know their instructor's story, and they didn't need to. Her legacy lived in every shot they took, every life they saved, every moment they chose patience over impulse. Sometimes late at night, veterans would gather at the base exchange and tell stories. They spoke of impossible shots, of guardian angels watching from impossible positions, of a legendary sniper who had saved an entire unit with one perfect shot. They called her Sky Ghost, the warrior who had vanished into legend. But Emma was still there, still teaching, still serving, still proving that true heroes didn't need recognition. They needed only the knowledge that they were making a difference when it mattered most. 10 years after her return to Fort Bragg, Emma Walsh sat in her small office reviewing training scores from the latest graduating class. At 52, she moved with the same quiet efficiency that had defined her entire career, though her hair was now completely silver and laugh lines had appeared around her steel gray eyes. A knock at her door interrupted her work. "Come in," she called, not looking up from the paperwork. Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer Hayes entered, carrying a thick manila folder. Emma recognized her as the new commanding officer of the Advanced Sniper School, young, ambitious, and eager to modernize training protocols. "Sergeant Major Walsh," Hayes began formally, "I need to discuss something important with you." Emma finally looked up, noting the colonel's serious expression. Yes, ma'am. Hayes placed the folder on Emma's desk. I've been reviewing personnel files, trying to understand the success rates of our training programs. Your students have the highest accuracy scores, the lowest failure rates, and the best combat performance records of any instructor in the school's history. Emma nodded politely. They're good soldiers, ma'am. They work hard. That's not what this is about, Hayes continued, opening the folder. I've been getting inquiries from the Pentagon, from military historians, from documentary filmmakers. They're all asking about the same person, someone called Sky Ghost, a legendary sniper who supposedly saved a reconnaissance team in Afghanistan with an impossible shot. Emma's expression didn't change, but Hayes noticed her hands had gone, perfectly still on the desk. The interesting thing is, Hayes continued, the coordinates for that legendary shot match exactly with the location. Where Staff Sergeant Emma Walsh was declared EMEA in 2014, and Emma Walsh happens to be the real name of the instructor sitting in front of me, who somehow appeared at Fort Bragg with no official transfer orders and no documentation of how she survived 10 years in a combat zone. Emma remained silent, but Hayes could see the careful calculation in her eyes. Ma'am, Emma said finally, I'm not sure what you're asking me. Hayes leaned forward. I'm asking if you're the Sky Ghost. I'm asking if you spent 10 years conducting solo operations in Afghanistan. I'm asking if you're the person who made that impossible shot that saved 6 American soldiers. Emma was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the training range where her current students were practicing long-range techniques. Does it matter? She asked softly. It matters because you're a legend, Hayes replied. Stories about the Sky Ghost are being told in every combat unit, in every special operations command. Soldiers are naming their rifles after you. Snipers are carving ghost symbols on their equipment. You've become a symbol of what American marksmanship can accomplish. Emma shook her head slightly. Legends aren't real people, Colonel. They're stories that inspire soldiers to be better than they think they can be. Sometimes the story is more important than the truth. Hayes studied Emma's face, seeing something she hadn't expected. Not pride in legendary status, but concern that recognition might interfere with her ability to continue serving effectively. The Pentagon wants to interview you, Hayes said. They want to document your techniques, study your methods, possibly create a new training program based on your experiences. And if I decline, then I tell them that Sergeant Major Walsh is a dedicated instructor who prefers to serve without publicity. Hayes paused. But I also need to know, are you planning to retire? Because if you are, we need to prepare for the transition. Your loss would be devastating to this program. Emma considered the question carefully. She thought about the mountains of Afghanistan, about the squad that died trying to complete their mission, about the decades of students she'd trained to be better soldiers than she'd ever been. Colonel, she said finally, I don't plan to retire as long as there are soldiers who need training. My job is to make sure the next generation of snipers is prepared for whatever they might face. That work isn't finished. Hayes nodded, understanding. Then we'll handle the Pentagon inquiries appropriately. Your service record will reflect what needs to be reflected, and nothing more. As Hayes prepared to leave, Emma called after her. Ma'am, the soldiers who tell stories about Sky Ghost. What do they say? Hayes smiled. They say she appears when American soldiers are in trouble, makes impossible shots from impossible positions, and disappears without a trace. They say she's proof that some warriors never stop fighting, even when the war is over. Emma nodded. Slowly, that's a good story. Stories like that make soldiers believe they can accomplish impossible things. After Hayes left, Emma returned to her paperwork, but her mind wandered to the training range where her students were learning lessons she'd paid for with 10 years of solitude in hostile mountains. Each perfect shot they fired, each tactical decision they made, each life they would eventually save, carried forward the legacy of 7 soldiers who had died trying to complete their mission. Emma Walsh didn't need her name in history books or her story in documentaries. She needed only the knowledge that somewhere in the world, American soldiers were safer because she had chosen to serve in silence, to teach in anonymity, to remain faithful to her principles, even when no one was watching. As evening fell over Fort Bragg, Emma locked her office and walked to the training range. She would stay after hours, as she always did, preparing equipment and targets for tomorrow's instruction. Not because anyone asked her to, but because excellence lived in the details. In the gathering darkness, a small figure moved between shooting positions with quiet purpose, ensuring everything was perfect for the next day's training. To casual observers, she was simply a dedicated instructor preparing for another day of teaching. But to the soldiers whose lives she would save through her training, whose skills she would sharpen through patient instruction, whose courage she would inspire through quiet example, she was something more. She was the ghost who never stopped serving, the warrior who fought not for recognition, but for the simple knowledge that she was making a difference when it mattered most. The legend of Sky Ghost would continue to spread through military units around the world, inspiring soldiers to believe in the impossible. But the real Emma Walsh would remain where she belonged, on the training range, passing on hard-earned wisdom to the next generation of warriors, proving every day that true heroism wasn't about being remembered. It was about making sure others could complete their missions and return home safely. The shot that saved Bravo Team had lasted 1 second, but the discipline that made it possible had taken 10 years of patient preparation. That was the difference between heroes and legends. Heroes acted when called upon, but legends were ready before the call ever came. Emma Walsh was ready. She always had been, and she always would be. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.